So, some of the major themes, just to summarize here, that we're looking at is that the king or the prominent figure is buried in a mound in a pyramid, and that this mound or pyramid resembles the older idea of a mountain, right? Or just the mountain itself being that place. And so this is where they become associated with or dwell in it or are buried in it, as we heard about Genghis Khan, and that the mound or the mountain puts them in closer proximity to the sky world. That's very literal in that way that you're creating an elevated space to be closer to the sky. And so in this way, their soul is given the power of flight, and then they're elevated above the other dead. So they're not just like a normal dead person who may be buried within the ground. They're elevated above them, literally. And so their power in the sky gives them the ability to assist with weather phenomena, such as rain bringing, so that they may tend to their people's needs even after death. So this is the older idea. This is the shamanic idea, right? That in having the ability to go upward in shamanic flight into the sky world, you are able to negotiate with the spiritual beings up there, with the bird-like beings who rule in that domain, and work with them so that you can ensure rain, so that you can ensure rain, especially, that you can ensure favorable weather phenomena so that your agriculture and so that your hunting and all these different things are beneficial for your people. So this is the connection between going up into the sky world and rulership, and why it would be a king or a priest king who was given these powers to be able to secure this for the people. And it's also important to remember that this circulation of power actually resembles the water cycle and this emphasis on rain, wherein, water goes into the ground or it cools up and then it evaporates and goes back into the sky, and then it rains down and then goes back down into the underworld in this way. And so the shaman or the king's abilities here, they mirror the flow of water in the natural world, and the ability to be able to go down into the underworld and then to fly upwards into the sky, and then to go back down into the underworld, fly back upwards into the sky, so on and so forth. And in this way, they're securing prosperity for their people. So the primary deities who are associated with this process naturally are associated with the sky in particular. There are underworld things happening for sure, but they're not as important, especially for the king in this immortalizing process, as they are with going upwards into the sky. So we see this emphasis on storm and weather gods, sky gods, which give the king or the priest or the shaman the power of flight. And so this is like a proto Zeus, right? Or this idea of the All Father found in the monotheistic faiths, who goes up into the sky to protect and once again secure prosperity for their people, the tribe, or the nation. Um, on its own, this Sky Father idea is not inherently bad, right? So we just see a shaman or a ruler trying to secure good conditions, positive conditions for their people by going upwards into the sky and negotiating with the spirit beings of the sky. But I think, and these are my ideas, that this universalizing tendency, this notion of going upwards into the sky and seeing from above, right? Like looking at the world and seeing all the little people as ants from above, um, that it leads to this kind of universalizing tendency, or this notion of seeing everything as being the same. And that once you begin to see everything as the same, or believe that you have a vantage point, a privileged vantage point from above, that the horizons continue to grow outward. And therefore, the god of space, air, and expansion, this kind of proto Jupiter, right, begins to see further and further and outward in the world, that this is subsumed all into his reason, or all into his abstract thought. And for William Blake, this figure was embodied by this god, this myth theme called Urizen, which is a reference to some think your reason, or having to do with the idea of abstraction or reason itself. Going back into the history a little bit, it's actually the Akkadian Empire who are thought to have the first um, historical empire. Or historians would say that the Akkadians were the first to have what we would call an empire. And it was founded by this figure who you may have heard of called Sargon of Akkad. Um, and some have also thought that he could be the inspiration for the biblical Nimrod figure who erected the Tower of Babel. So in that sense, we see once again this idea of the phallus or the pyramid or the mound, which goes upwards into the sky, right? To kind of use its height to see above everything else and to go into communication with the God of the sky. Interestingly, his grandson, who was called Naram Sin, which means something like favored by the moon, actually, Sin being the name for the moon god, he was the first Mesopotamian king to claim divinity for himself. And one of the names that he called himself was the King of the Four Quarters, or the King of the Universe, the King of the known world. Four quarters being this idea of the four directions, right? So if you're a ruler in the sky, you're the king of everything in the four directions, which means you're the king of basically the 360-degree circle. You're the king of everything that's observable in within 360 degrees, which would be everything. And so, importantly, as I am theorizing here, the beginning of empire comes when, you know, when in life, so an embodied human being, an individual directly declares divinity for themselves, which we see here with this first empire. And in the older ways, this divinity did not occur until after death. So, as we've been talking about with the shaman, or even some of these like priest king figures, the immortality or the deification of the pharaoh or of this figure. The pharaoh's, I don't think, a good example because there was a deification of the pharaoh. But in the older idea, the ruler in the mound was not deified until after he died, right? He didn't become a god until after he died and underwent this spiritual process in the other world. But when you see this same mythology then transplant itself into a living person where they declared themselves as they're still alive, that same immortal deified figure, here's where we see the beginnings of empire in a mythological sense, and truly the beginnings of the physical expansion of empire in the world in a very tangible way. So I mentioned Atum, who is this primordial god, male god who is rising up out of the waters of chaos in ancient Egypt. And here we see this theme that comes up again and again and again in mythology of the male figure spearing the dragon or the giant serpent, right? So we see Atum here doing this with the figure of Apep, this giant serpent-like being. And then similarly, in ancient Egypt, we see it with Set is a storm god. He's very similar to Zeus and Jupiter, and he's killing the same large serpent demon, Apep. And he's doing this to protect the sun. And so this is what we've been getting into, right? Set or the powers of the storm god, also he's very similar to Mars, are being utilized to maintain this orderly motion of the sun, to maintain the circumscribed order, this circle seen by the movement, the daily movement of the sun. And then this is a version I'm sure you maybe even more familiar with, right? We see this with Saint George and with so many others. It's quite common. And I would maintain that this is also continued in many of these storm god figures. Here we see Zeus, a bronze of Zeus on the left, and then on the right we see the Canaanite deity Baal. And they're both in this pose, which is them kind of holding up their lightning bolt. But I would argue that it could be a lightning bolt, but also very much this even older idea of holding up the spear or the implement, which is, striking down for Zeus it would be the Titans, right? And then for Baal it would be the Yam, who is this kind of like Tiamat, where we have Marduk doing the same thing in Mesopotamia. It's this kind of primordial earth mother or dragon-like feminine force that's associated with water and earth, that this god is, smiting or keeping down with either a lightning bolt or a spear of some kind. In this post here, this is what I forgot I put this slide in. Here we see this Marduk doing this with Tiamat, who's kind of this like sea dragon, if you will. Here we see the same theme with Indra, the Vedic deity Indra, who's just like Zeus and Baal. He is a storm god who's associated with rain, and he is the king of the gods, as they all are. And on the image on the left, we see him smiting in, I think, the most famous story about him, this large naga named, this large serpent named Vritra, who is drinking all of the water and creating drought. And so he smites Vritra, the naga, to release the water and secure prosperity through bringing rain once again, so that the agriculture can happen and the water flow can continue. So we see these same themes coming up again and again with this god.